What's to say about the Mariners?
What did this Etsy witch claim to, or TikTok witch?
Well, there's a
do?
history. This is the most Seattle thing ever. I think there is a history of Etsy witches and maybe TikTok witches now, because I got one on my feed, casting luck spells for the Mariners. I'm sure some of them are hexing the Blue Jays.
It's dirty.
I know. But I mean, that's the most Seattle thing to me that could exist is some crystals. And like, I want to see some crystals in Cal Raleigh's back pocket. That's what I would like to see.
You know, this is funny that we know so little about baseball that we are incapable of talking about anything.
Yeah, exactly. We're like, let's talk about baseball. Magic? Yes. Well,
Etsy witches?
It's time for Sound Politics. You're listening to Sound Politics. I'm Scott Greenstone.
And I'm Kat Smith, sitting in for Libby Dankman. And another big No Kings protest is coming up this weekend. On June 14th, we saw another wave of No Kings rallies sweep across cities all over the country.
That was the first one.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And at the time, those were the largest mass mobilization effort by opponents of Donald Trump's presidency in his second term. And now the left-wing groups behind that first mass protest are back. I checked out their organizational website this morning, and it looks like, once again, there are hundreds of events planned all over the country for Saturday, and there are dozens in the Seattle area alone. The big one is going to be at Seattle Center around midday Saturday.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, thinking about the national context, this comes in the middle, again, of a lot of reports of violence and threats of violence from federal officers in Portland, in Chicago. On Tuesday, federal agents tear-gassed residents in Chicago, according to the New York Times, and they even tear-gassed around a dozen Chicago police just without warning.
Wow.
A federal spokesperson said there are more instances of, quote, agitators and criminals ramming cars into our law enforcement officers, basically just people interfering with this campaign that Donald Trump has embarked on of rounding up undocumented immigrants, sometimes people who have not committed any violent, crimes, but violently taking them into custody. There's also some evidence that federal agents may be provoking people, right? Like reporting from Portland that I read a couple days ago says medics in an ambulance showed up to the Immigration and Customs Enforcement facility that we were talking about last week on the show, and they were there to transport a protester with a broken or maybe dislocated collarbone to the hospital. And internal reports say feds threatened to shoot the medics.
Well, tension everywhere. Tension in Portland and tension here in Seattle over whether the city will become Trump's next crackdown target. He hasn't. We've talked about this on the show before. He hasn't said explicitly that he'll do this, but the city government and officials at the state level are preparing for that just in case. And as we barreled toward this big protest on Saturday, I expect we'll start seeing calls from elected officials to keep things peaceful, don't provoke a response from Trump or the feds. We saw similar calls like that over the summer before the original No Kings protest. But, Scott, there are people on the left who are watching these unprecedented crackdowns on cities, and at times the violent responses from immigration enforcement officials, masked police out there plucking people off the streets. And folks are watching all this wondering, what is the right way to respond to this moment that we're in? What's the role that protesting has right now? Some Democrats are worried about how protests might give Trump any pretense to crack down. Others say that using force at protests could be justifiable since Trump has masked police out there taking people away.
Right, like if they're not playing by the rules.
Right.
Why should we? Yeah, I want to talk about all this because we have been talking so much about violence and protest, the last few weeks, where they intersect, where they don't. And I think that we have heard a lot of the right-wing perspective of Antifa's out here causing violence. But I've been really curious to hear more perspectives from around the political spectrum, particularly liberals who are kind of considering exactly what you're talking about. So I want to start today with this one guy that I talked to around the time of the last No Kings protest.
I remember this guy. He was in a video that I sent you that kind of went viral over the summer.
Yeah, mini viral maybe. Yeah, but definitely spread around, especially right-wing circles. So let me set the scene, though.
Okay.
Before let's hear some context first. It's June 11th, just a few days before the first No Kings protest. Protests are ramping up around the country against ICE raids. And in Seattle, scores of protesters are outside the federal building in downtown. Sunset is nearing. The protest has been largely peaceful. And here's where we meet that guy. His name is Tom Clark, and he's a lawyer who works downtown. He's originally a Texan, and he has immigrant roots himself.
My grandfather on my dad's side is from Galway, Ireland, and my mom's family's from Mexico.
And he's really perturbed by the ICE crackdowns. He described himself as a Bernie Sanders liberal, but a Democrat. He's outside the federal building, and he goes up an outdoor escalator to get a photo as the sky turns gold, that beautiful Seattle summer sunset. And then he notices some people dressed in black, faces covered with, he said, trash can looking shields.
And they just started knocking over planters, taking chairs. I think they were trying to take them down the escalator to block the street.
Okay, so Tom started yelling at these folks in black to stop. And it just so happened that at this moment, a right-wing influencer named Jonathan Cho was there, and he was filming. Cho, you may recognize that name.
We've talked about him before on the podcast.
Yeah, we talked about him last week. He was at the White House telling the president about left-wing violence he's witnessed in the field, but also saying all these things about how it's connected to the democratic socialism of America that I have not seen any evidence for. But Cho was at this protest in June and captured this video of what I think you and I thought was a really interesting, revealing interaction. Yeah. The first voice you're going to hear here is Tom yelling at this, what he thinks is Antifa. The second voice you hear is someone dressed all in black.
Violence is not the answer. No one's getting violent. Destruction of property is not the answer. Power to the immigrants. Antifa. Shut up.
Wow.
Yeah. At the end there, he's saying F Antifa. You probably heard that. But Antifa, right, is short for anti-fascist. It's a loosely defined ideology that feels the need to respond to fascism with whatever violence is necessary, right?
And maybe also feels the need to shout wah, wah, wah over their critics.
Yeah. And just to be clear, we do not know if these people are actually, if they would consider themselves Antifa.
Right. They weren't wearing lanyards or anything.
Yeah, there's no uniform. But as this video spreads online, some people are like, don't call them Antifa, call them anarchists, right? What's anti-fascist about this? They're just kind of destroying property and being, anarchical or whatever. I think those people's argument is we should all be against fascism. So these people don't have the corner on the market.
Right. And I mean, even the word Antifa is a shortening, like a portmanteau, and anti-fascist.
That's right. Yeah.
A lot of people are worried right now the country's drifting into fascism. But I think that we should note that literally anyone can dress in black and attend a protest. Doesn't mean they're part of an organized left-wing militant group.
And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But so there's other people that see this video and they're like, hell yeah, I'm really glad you finally stuck it to Antifa. Let me buy you lunch. It also gets picked up by that kind of right-wing online media sphere we've been talking about. Commenters are saying this is proof that Antifa need to be labeled a terrorist organization. This was, again, before Trump, actually did that. And Tom is just kind of taking all this in, right? And kind of thinking like, oh, hold on here. I didn't intend for this to get picked up and become mini viral in right-wing circles. Just all of these different takes are percolating in his head.
And this is what he's grappling with is kind of an age-old question among progressives, the classic do the right thing question. Yeah, Martin Luther King Jr. versus Malcolm X.
Exactly. Tom said the same thing.
Both had a similar goal. However, Malcolm X felt like there should be some sort of a militant resistance. I think some people were just so mad that they got to the point where they felt like destroying property, setting fires was the only way to get more attention on the situation.
And that night, right, Tom was really mad about, Antifa, whether or not those guys were Antifa. He told a TV station he thought they were just rich kids from Ballard playing dress up, which I loved.
Well, I mean, do we know what actual Seattle Antifa members think about resistance or property destruction, violence? Like, how do they justify it or why do they think it's necessary? I know that I asked you, classic editor move, I asked you to try and see if you could call up a bona fide member of Antifa or even an anarchist on the phone. Did that happen?
No, unfortunately not. Sorry, dock my pay. I did not.
You're fired.
They don't have like a Facebook group or anything. Like, I did call a guy who a lot of people have said is part of Antifa. He punched out a right-wing journalist in Seattle on the night of the No Kings protest after most of the protesters went home. Mm-hmm. He has now pled guilty to felony assault. I left him a voicemail saying, hey, do you consider yourself a member of Antifa? And if so, do you want to talk about why you did that? Okay. But he has not called me back. Shocker. I did talk to someone who has been labeled Dr. Antifa by conservatives. We are going to hear from him after a short break here on Sound Politics. We're also going to hear from elected Democrats, an undocumented organizer. We got it all.
We did not get an Etsy witch, though.
No, next time. We are back and talking about protests and Antifa. I spoke with Mark Bray, a historian at Rutgers, who is sometimes labeled Dr. Antifa by conservatives. He wrote...
It's catchy.
I know, right? So, and that's because he wrote Antifa, the Anti-Fascist Handbook, which he describes in the intro as, quote, an unabashedly partisan call to arms. And he donates 50% of his proceeds from the book to the International Anti-Fascist Defense Fund. So I think he's about as close to an Antifa supporter or apologist as we're going to get.
Yeah, we want to hear from an Antifa voice.
That's
I think
right.
This guy is going to get us there.
And for this book, I would say he's an expert. He also interviewed more than 60 members of Antifa from a number of countries, almost half from the U.S. So here is what he said is kind of the driving thrust of why they feel violence is necessary.
I had this great quote from an anti-fascist who was active in Baltimore in the 90s and early 2000s. You fight them with your fists so you don't have to fight them with guns. You fight them with guns so you don't have to fight them with tanks.
I should note here, we spoke earlier this summer, and since then, Bray has announced he's leaving the country because he was receiving death threats.
Whoa, really? He left the country?
He is planning on moving to Spain with his family.
Wow.
Yeah, because it became kind of a big thing at Rutgers University. Again, he was labeled Dr. Antifa.
Oh, right.
But, I do think this focus on Antifa and some sort of code they have, with all respect to him, I mean, this is actually something he said too. We do not really have any sense of whether these people in Black Bloc, those people that Tom yelled at, would call themselves Antifa. Mm-hmm. Like another expert, told me that these violent fringes that we're talking about, again, you said anyone can dress up in black and go. Mm-hmm. They often are people who have a quote, this expert said, smorgasbord of conflicting sometimes ideologies. Like they may be united only by the feeling that violence furthers their cause, that something really bad is happening and the only thing that they can do is be violent. That might be the only thing they agree on.
Okay, so we've got the Antifa take.
Yeah, great.
We've got a peaceful protester. How about Democrats? What do Democrats say about this idea that you have to fight fascism with violence?
Yeah, so around this time, there was a Democrat who saw some videos online, an elected Democrat, and took to X to post about it. So I talked to Mari Levitt, who represents part of Pierce County in the state legislature. She said violence is, quote, tainting the protest movement. And so videos of violent protesters, or the ones shared by the White House on Instagram, right, of like burning flags and cars and fireworks. Here's what she said.
It makes it seem like it's everywhere all the time. I don't believe that that's the case, but I do think this small militant group are creating lawlessness in a way that makes it difficult for those who do want a peaceful protest and do want to stand up.
Okay, so two conflicting takes here. On the one hand, violence is necessary. Some say to push back. On the other hand, violence is tainting the protest. Is there a third take, something in between those two?
I did talk to someone who kind of said this is all a false dichotomy because the protesters aren't the ones like starting the violence is essentially the argument. The police and ICE at these protests are. So for that, I talked to Rosario Lopez, who is an undocumented organizer in Seattle, who was at this June 11th protest that Tom was at in downtown Seattle, the one that we started with. And Lopez is not someone who's afraid to criticize leftists, right? In the same day, actually, Rosario took the mic away from Kshama Sawant, who was speaking at a rally, because Sawant was making a campaign speech for Congress, and Rosario felt it was inappropriate.
The reason why we join these protests, why we're taking action, is not because we have a political campaign. It's not because we want to grow, our base or recruit more people. That is not the reason. The reason is because our community is being attacked.
But Rosario has not seen violence, or at least they said they haven't seen violence coming from Antifa or Black Bloc or, whatever you want to call them. Rosario said the violence, again, comes from ICE and federal agents, not just toward protesters, but detaining families, children, in facilities with really frightening conditions. Not for nothing, 14 people have died in ICE custody just since Trump took office.
Wow.
And that's according to ICE data. During all of Biden's term, 26 people died in ICE custody. So it's already at more than half, and we're not even a year in.
And how do you respond peacefully when the system is trying to kill you and kill your loved ones? If someone comes and kidnaps your loved one, what would you do?
Wow. Okay. So with all these different takes, where does that leave Tom, the lawyer from that viral video who tangled with the Black Bloc protesters? Where did he finally come down on all of this?
He was uncertain at first when we talked in the summer. I called him again this week, and he said he feels completely different now than in that video. And obviously so much has happened since then, especially when you talk about ICE, but also just violence in general. Charlie Kirk was murdered, right? The National Guard has been deployed to many more cities. Even though Tom still thinks what they were doing is wrong, he told me...
The people in Black Bloc?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, even though he thinks that Antifa or whatever, that destroying property in downtown Seattle, he loves Seattle, he still thinks that was wrong. But he wishes now that instead of yelling at them, he could sit down and have a beer with them.
Huh.
I understand the emotions and the feelings that lead to tactics like that, right? Where people get to a point where they're we've tried peaceful protests and things have not gotten better socially. We have a regime that is just saying, basically the Constitution, due process. So why should we sit here and just do our orderly, peaceful protests? But I still believe that peaceful protest has power, as we'll see this weekend with the No Kings marches on the 18th. There's still power in peaceful resistance. There's still power in creating community and unity around fighting back.
So even though he still disagrees with their tactics, now he feels like the enemy that they both face is a whole lot bigger and worse than some, broken planter pots and some disorder downtown. In fact, he feels like he wouldn't shout F Antifa at those people in black anymore because he thinks that's actually kind of buying into the right-wing narrative that any resistance to fascism is Antifa.
I've gone from saying I guess F Antifa to I'm Antifa, but I know some people might think that sounds bad, but I am anti-fascist, and I do believe that fascism is dangerous.
Whoa, so he's really evolved there. I mean, hearing him say that, thinking about his evolution from the summer to now and everything that's happened, I really liked what you said, Scott, a minute ago about how this is all kind of taking on a different hue than it did over the summer. Back when you reported this story originally, like you said, Charlie Kirk hadn't been murdered, and Trump hadn't yet issued an executive order calling Antifa, however you want to define that word. He hadn't yet ordered it to be designated a terrorist group. He also hadn't ordered his Justice Department to investigate nonprofit networks that fund left-wing political causes. The nonprofit Indivisible, that's one of the main groups behind the No Kings rallies. They're one of the possible targets of his Justice Department crackdowns. And what we saw over the summer in Seattle, that No Kings rally, it was massive, but it was peaceful. It was mostly peaceful during the day. At night, there were clashes downtown involving protesters in black and police. There were arrests. So what we're seeing is protests can sometimes be different in the daytime versus what happens at night.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean the organizers of the protests are calling for violence. It's also not clear whether the violence, when and if it does take place, is coordinated in any way. But what we've seen in other cities like Portland is the Trump administration using isolated instances of violence to crack down on dissent, to send in troops, to issue threats. So if there's any violence anywhere near the site of the No Kings rally on Saturday in Seattle, I think the feds are probably going to be taking a really close look at that. And a lot of people are going to be really worried about what might happen next.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to me how much of this conversation is about labels, because where Tom kind of ended up was, if I call these people in black Antifa just because they're smashing stuff, I'm kind of buying into this narrative that really simplifies things and says, you know, and really what Tom thinks, you know, is that, you know, we can't let the president loosely define anti-fascist as whoever he wants and then just say you're part of a domestic terror organization. Like I'm not saying that's what he's doing, but a lot of people feel that that's what he's going to do. And so labels really matter, and understanding complexity matters, even when you're talking about, you know, a small group of people who are causing, you know, violence on the fringes or after these protests and things like that. It's an interesting place, and I wasn't sure how I felt after talking to Tom. Obviously, you know, it worries me when people are kind of turning their eyes and averting their eyes from violence just because they agree with the people who are perpetrating it. At the same time, I do understand, you know, that you know, kind of connecting all of that, you know, violence or Antifa to like left-wing political causes is super dangerous. It's a dangerous road to go down.
Yeah. And like I said, this is all very complex. Complexity doesn't look good on a hat. It doesn't make for a good slogan. It's hard to communicate to people.
Could we sell merch, though, maybe that says complexity does look good on this hat? It could be a hat. It could be a Mariners hat.
That could be our Sound Politics swag.
I think that would be great. Complexity looks good on this hat. Sound Politics.
I'm going to quit my job and be a swag copywriter.
I think we could do it.
I think we did it.
That's all for our show today. Thank you for listening to Sound Politics. I'm Scott Greenstone, your host. Our show is edited by you, Cat Smith, when you're not also in the other host chair. Our episode today was produced by Hans Anderson.
And this show is only possible because of your support. Consider a donation to keep us going at KUOW.org/politics. And see you next time.
See you next week.